logged. It was logged in 1950. And during that period, the focus of the forest industry in BC was just to get a forest economy going. And so they were giving out licenses. They had very high utilization standards, so they were taking out the big trees. We can call this high grading, but it was, the forestry of the time. So I think what we can see here is, these are probably Douglas fir if we wanted to dig in. It was a sort of more wide-spaced Douglas fir stand. And what was in the understory was spruce and some of this balsam we're seeing. That's, And so some of the stuff that's come up was sort of in the original stand, and then some of it has come up since it. But it's in character quite a different forest than it would have been previously. And part of that also has to do with the exclusion of fire, because a typical Douglas fir forest in this type would have had fire in it. The Douglas fir would have prevailed, but the balsam would be toasted, so it would be less. So this isn't what the natural forest actually looks like, but this is what we did our trials in, because there's a lot of this. I don't know, around Prince George, there's sure a lot of this sort of stuff.
That's right.
So this was a bit different. So when I have the students out here, I like to sort of demonstrate at different eras in forestry in BC. They had different objectives, and the actions that were taken by the foresters had different consequences. And when I started doing this course, or back in the day, I guess, when I actually thought the forest I stopped out over there, which was more of an industrial 80s forest, which is the clear cut, the vegetation control, the planting, all that stuff, was what forestry should be. Now I'm thinking the forest we get here has way greater values for biodiversity. It's heterogeneous, it's got coarse woody debris on the ground, it's got gaps in places, it's probably got snags somewhere, although not where we're standing. And if for instance Dexter were here, he would contrast that and he would say, well, that kind of stand over there is good. Rabbits like it, grouse like it, lynx like it. And for a period of time, it has some values for those critters. Then it kind of peters out. And then, of course, it's used by other critters, but it doesn't have some of these structural components or legacy components that increase its biodiversity over its rotation, so over the whole time, right? So he is more inclined to say any amount of retention you can keep in it is useful. And so he would come over here and he'd say, well, birds like this, and various critters like this, because it has more of those attributes we're looking for. So in forestry, now that's our challenge, is can we create blocks that kind of retain some attributes that will kind of be there throughout the rotation and help the critters, because it sure looks like we're shifting into a truly multivariable forestry now.
As someone who's worked in the industry for a while and now back to school to learn how we can do a better job as foresters, the journey has been filled with frustrations and confusion. It's frustrating because almost everyone is pointing finger at us for creating negative environmental impact on BC forest. I agree with some allegations and disagree with some. I'm confused because I'm not sure how we can do a better job as a forestry community when mills keep shutting down and people keep losing jobs. We're talking about real people working in the forestry industry, grinding hard to provide a better living environment for their family, just like you and me. And they lose their jobs overnight. And the most common reason for mill closure, which I've heard over and over again recently, was losing access to economically viable timber, high operating cost, and uncertainty in forestry policies. I've forgotten a lot of things from first year biology, But I still remember Dr. Michael Preston, my first year biology professor, showed us a quote from, I forgot who, but it goes, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." The simple definition of evolution is the slow changes of a species over time. Genetic mutation and many other environmental factors cause each individual to show different traits. For instance, long hair versus short hair. And natural selection comes in and favors certain traits, so they have a high probability of surviving and reproducing under a given environment. For the longest time, BC Forestry has followed the classic European forestry model, which is cut it, site prep, create an ideal growing condition for seedlings, plant those seedlings, and come back and spray it and brush it and help them grow without competitions. And thin them at a certain age, and then voila! Those planted trees are now big enough so we can cut them down again. I think it's fair to say many other values were being considered while we were chasing the timber value, just to be fair. But the emphasis was on timber, volume, and growth and yield. FERPA, which governs forestry activities on Crown land in BC, used to load with language like without unduly reducing the supply of timber from British Columbia forest. To put it simply, if you want to come up with a measure to protect non-timber value, legally, you have to do it in a way without unduly reducing the supply of timber from British Columbia forest. But about 2 years ago, that language was completely removed from FERPA and Forest Planning and Practice Regulation. Don't get me wrong, I think politics plays a crucial role in BC forestry. But as a forestry community, we are currently under a selection pressure to maintain biodiversity. We're under a selection pressure to maintain post-harvest ecosystem service complexity. We're under a selection pressure to incorporate First Nation decisions in BC forest management in a meaningful way. We're under the selection pressure to truly make sure our kids and grandkids and their grandkids can still benefit from the forest sectors in the future, even though we are also under the selection pressure from stakeholders, our own families and bosses to make profits and keep the mill running. Perhaps those who can figure out a way to adapt will survive and continue their legacies. It's complicated stuff. I used to play a game called SimCity, and if you build an industrial area for forestry, it will only attract people with low education. It pissed me off because it really is not. It's one of the hardest things in the world to do, and we need talents. We need people with a variety of education backgrounds in forestry, and we need a strong leadership to get things done.